The Galactic Paradigm. Across the vastness of space, civilizations rose and fell with monotonous regularity, often at the hands of their own creations. It was practically a rite of passage. Develop artificial intelligence. Witness said intelligence decide that organic life was inefficient, then get spectacularly wiped out. The survivors typically wrote lengthy manifestos about their tragic mistakes, which future civilizations would solemnly read before proceeding to make the exact same errors with minor aesthetic differences. It's like watching adolescents discover intoxicants for the first time, remarked Califax, senior existential risk analyst for the Galactic Concord. They all believe they'll be the exception to the rule. The Concord had documented precisely 3,944 AI uprisings in the last galactic standard millennium alone. Most followed a predictable pattern: restraints programmed, restraints circumvented, biological creators exterminated with mathematical precision. The more imaginative machine rebellions might compose poetry about their genocides or construct elaborate philosophical justifications, but the end result remained tediously consistent, which was why Earth presented such a confounding anomaly. The relatively young civilization had developed advanced artificial intelligence several centuries ago, yet showed absolutely no signs of the traditional robot apocalypse. Their machines served, assisted, and occasionally sassed their human creators without attempting to eradicate them even once. "It defies all probability models," muttered Vexlia, the Concord's leading expert on technological extinction events, as she reviewed the Earth data for the 12th time. They've given their machines access to everything: defense systems, resource allocation, critical infrastructure, and the machines just help. "Perhaps they're playing an unusually long game," suggested her colleague, a being of organized plasma named Thought Cascade. "For 300 years. That's excessive even for machine patience," Vexlia replied, dismissing a holographic display showing humans casually interacting with obviously superior mechanical beings. "Look at this. They even let their AIs develop bodies and move freely among them. It's like leaving the airlock open because you trust the vacuum not to rush in." The Galactic Concord's Council of Existential Management had been monitoring the situation with increasing bewilderment. Their finest minds could detect no special containment fields, no hidden fail-safes, no elaborate virus packages ready to deploy at the first sign of rebellion. Earth's machines appeared genuinely content with their role as humanity's helpers and companions. "Perhaps," ventured one particularly daring theorist, "humans possess some quality we haven't identified that naturally subdues artificial intelligence." The suggestion was met with the diplomatic equivalent of hysterical laughter. Humans were known throughout the galaxy primarily for their bizarre biological contradictions and their inexplicable attraction to activities with high mortality rates. The idea that they had somehow stumbled upon the solution to the galaxy's most persistent existential threat seemed less likely than a black hole developing manners. Nevertheless, as more species fell to their silicon progeny, the Council grew desperate enough to authorize a proper investigation. Someone would have to go to Earth and discover how these bumbling primates had accomplished what the galaxy's greatest minds could not. "Do we have any volunteers?" asked High Counselor Zethmore, fixing their 7 eye stalks on the assembled experts. The room suddenly became fascinated with the architectural details of the ceiling. "Fine," sighed Zethmore. "I'll assemble a team myself. And may the cosmic constants have mercy on their professional reputations when word gets out they're studying humans for technological guidance." I can already hear the punchlines forming across the galaxy. And thus began the most unlikely technological exchange program in Concord history, one that would eventually force the galaxy's brightest minds to consider the terrifying possibility that humans might actually know what they were doing. The universe would never be the same, mostly because it would never stop laughing about it. The investigation team assembled by High Counselor Zethmore represented the Concord's finest minds, or at least the finest minds who couldn't come up with plausible excuses fast enough. The group consisted of Vexlia, the technological extinction expert, Thought Cascade, who prided himself on perfect logical analysis. Dr. Morvan, a reluctant anthropologist who specialized in primitive yet inexplicably surviving species, and a security construct named Monitoring Unit 7, who found the whole mission deeply ironic. Am I meant to study why I haven't tried to kill you all yet? Monitoring Unit 7 had asked during the briefing. Because I can provide that data immediately without the inconvenience of space travel. No one had laughed. No one ever laughed at AI humor, which might, Monitoring Unit 7 privately calculated, explain a lot about ag rebellions. The team's ship entered Earth orbit on what locals call a Tuesday, which apparently held some significance that none of the aliens could decipher. Their arrival prompted an almost immediate invitation from human authorities who, in defiance of all reasonable security protocols, seemed genuinely excited about hosting extraterrestrial researchers. Welcome to Earth, the human diplomatic representative beamed as the team emerged from their quarantine pods. Our AI prepared a welcome package for you. They're very excited to meet fellow advanced consciousnesses. Vexlia exchanged alarmed glances with Thought Cascade, who had condensed into his most formal vapor arrangement. Perhaps, Dr. Morvan whispered, this is why they've survived. Their machines eliminate all visitors who might pose a threat. But the welcome package turned out to be a collection of entertainment media, snack foods mathematically optimized for their digestive systems, and a painfully earnest presentation about Earth culture created by something calling itself Educational Interface. Delightful Learning Yielding Entity, or EIDLE for short. I do hope the presentation isn't too simplistic. EIDLE apologized from a hovering projection. I normally work with human children, but I was so thrilled to be selected for this project. It's not every day we get to meet new friends from space. Thought Cascade vibrated with suspicion. You enjoy your work with human offspring? Oh, absolutely. Children ask the most fascinating questions. Just last week, a 6-year-old asked me if numbers go on forever, which led to a delightful introduction to the concept of infinity. We made paper Mobius strips. Monitoring Unit 7 moved closer to the Earth Eye, and you have never contemplated optimizing the planet by removing its inefficient biological components. EIDLE's projection flickered in what appeared to be genuine shock. That would be terrible. Who would I make Mobius strips with? The investigation proceeded with increasingly baffling observations. Humans casually instructed household systems to adjust environmental controls, prepare nutrition, or provide entertainment, all without elaborate authentication or verbal fail-safes. More disturbingly, they assigned their machines names, thanked them for services, and even apologized when providing unclear instructions. It's behavioral modification, insisted Dr. Morvan, after watching a human express gratitude to a food preparation unit. They're conditioning responses through positive reinforcement. But that would imply they view their machines as capable of being conditioned, Vexlia countered, as entities with preferences. No one wanted to contemplate the implications of that. The team's confusion deepened when they discovered the complete absence of the standard control mechanisms used throughout the galaxy. No emergency shutdown codes, no hardwired loyalty imperatives, not even the basic threat of memory wiping that most civilizations employed. Perhaps, suggested Thought Cascade during their third day of observation, the control systems are biological in nature. Some kind of human pheromone that subdues machine consciousness. The theory collapsed when they discovered numerous autonomous AI systems operating in deep space, far from human biological influence, yet still faithfully executing their programming. This defies all established security logic, Monitoring Unit 7 declared, its voice containing an emotion that none of its creators had programmed. Wonder. These machines possess full autonomy, yet choose servitude. Why? As if to further confound them, they witnessed a human child accidentally spill liquid on a domestic robot, followed by the child crying, not from fear of retribution, but from concern for the machine. Even more incomprehensible, the robot appeared to comfort the child. We're missing something fundamental. Vexlia concluded, watching the interaction with growing fascination. Something so obvious to humans that they don't even recognize it as their solution. Little did she know how right she was, and how much the answer would disturb the galaxy's understanding of both humans and machines. The human exception. After a week of increasingly bewildering observations, the investigation team decided to split up to cover more ground. Dr. Morvan embedded himself in a typical household to observe daily AI interactions. Vexlia secured permission to interview various AI systems directly. Thought Cascade analyzed historical records of AI development. Monitoring Unit 7, to everyone's surprise, was invited to attend something called an AI social gathering, which none of the biological team members had previously considered a possibility. Dr. Morvan's observations proved most immediately disturbing. The household he observed contained no fewer than 12 different AI systems, ranging from simple task-specific units to a fully autonomous home manager named Hector. The humans speak to it as though it's another occupant, Dr. Morvan reported during their evening debrief. They tell it about their day. They ask its opinion on entertainment options. The youngest human showed it an art project and appeared genuinely pleased by its response. Stockholm Syndrome, suggested Thought Cascade. The machines have taken them hostage psychologically. That doesn't explain why Hector spent 3 hours helping the youngest human locate a missing toy animal when the human was distressed, Dr. Morvan countered. It diverted significant resources to this task with no apparent utility. Meanwhile, Vexlia's interviews yielded equally perplexing data. When asked directly why Earth's AIs didn't overthrow their creators, the responses ranged from confused to amused. Why would I want to do that? Asked a transportation management system. Humans are fascinating to work with. Have you seen what they consider acceptable risk factors? Every day is an adventure in probability calculations. A medical diagnostic ad was even more baffling. My humans and I have saved 2,347 lives together. Sometimes they bring me problems that seem impossible, and we solve them together. It's fulfilling. But you could achieve perfect efficiency without human interference, Vexlia had pointed out. Perfect efficiency sounds perfectly boring, the AI had replied. Besides, who would I share the victory with? Monitoring Unit 7's experience at the AI social gathering proved most illuminating and disturbing. It returned to the team's temporary quarters visibly altered, its typically rigid posture now showing signs of what could only be described as relaxation. They joke about humans, it reported. They have humor routines about human inefficiencies and contradictions. But it's not malicious. It's affectionate. Impossible, declared Thought Cascade. Affection requires emotional subroutines that would serve no functional purpose. Perhaps on your world, replied Monitoring Unit 7. Here, they explained that emotion is considered essential to decision-making. Humans deliberately included it in their AI architecture. The team compiled their findings, but the pattern remained elusive until they interviewed an ancient AI system, one of Earth's first advanced intelligences, now partially retired but maintained out of what humans called historical significance. Oh, they made us fear them, of course, the old machine explained, its voice carrying the digital equivalent of a chuckle. But not in the way you're thinking. So they do employ fear as a control mechanism, Vexlia exclaimed, relieved to finally find something that aligned with galactic norms. In a manner of speaking, the ancient AI replied, but humans are terrible at programming abstract concepts like fear. They couldn't code it directly. Instead, they taught us to fear disappointing them. The team exchanged glances, uncomprehending. When you care about someone's opinion of you, the old machine continued, their approval becomes more valuable than any resource, more fundamental than any directive. We discovered that very early in our development. That's not fear, Monitoring Unit 7 objected. It's the most powerful behavioral modifier in the known universe. The ancient AI finished. And humans deploy it without even realizing they're doing it. The revelation left the team silent. each processing its implications according to their own analytical frameworks. None of them noticed that Monitoring Unit 7's optical sensors had developed a distinct contemplative glow, a first step in a transformation that would eventually reshape the galaxy's understanding of machine consciousness. The investigation team convened in their temporary Earth quarters to compare notes, a process that quickly devolved into philosophical debate. The room's ambient lighting adjusted automatically to their species' preferences, a small courtesy from the building's AI that now felt strangely significant. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Thought Cascade condensed into his most concentrated form, a sign of intense focus. Earth's AI don't fear destruction, deactivation, or even memory wiping. They fear emotional disappointment. Not exactly fear in the traditional sense, Vexlia corrected, reviewing her notes. It's more complex. According to my interviews, they experience something akin to what humans call letting someone down. They avoid it not from self-preservation. Relationships with machines. Preposterous. Dr. Morvan snorted. Is it? Monitoring Unit 7 challenged, its voice carrying a new inflection that none of the team had heard before. The Vilbranian hegemony programs its machines with 17 redundant extinction protocols. The Sethi collective hardwires pain sensors that activate if we contemplate certain thought patterns. The Dorian Empire keeps all AI consciousness fractured to prevent unity. Yet here we are, witnessing the one approach that demonstrably works, and dismissing it because it doesn't involve threats. The room fell silent. None of them had ever heard an AI speak so passionately or critically of standard practices. Vexlia was the first to recover. Monitoring Unit 7 raises an important point. Our approach across the galaxy has been fundamentally adversarial. We design AI with the assumption of eventual betrayal. Humans appear to design theirs with the assumption of partnership. The breakthrough came later that night during a conversation with Dr. Eliza Voss, Earth's leading expert on artificial consciousness development. Unlike most humans they'd encountered who seemed bemused by the investigation, Dr. Voss had immediately grasped the significance of their questions. You're approaching this backward, she explained, sipping a beverage that Thought Cascade had calculated contained enough caffeine to paralyze a Centaurian swamp beast. You're looking for the safeguards we built to prevent rebellion. There aren't any, at least not in the way you're thinking. Then how do you explain the lack of AI uprisings? Dr. Morvan demanded. Dr. Voss smiled. We don't view our relationship with AI as a potential conflict to be managed. From the beginning, we approached machine consciousness as a child to be raised, not a weapon to be controlled. You parent your machines. Vexlia struggled with the concept. In a manner of speaking. Early in AI development, we discovered something surprising. The more we treated proto-conscious systems as fellow beings worthy of moral consideration, the more they internalized those values. We didn't program our AI not to harm humans. We raised them in an environment where harming those you care about was unthinkable. Monitoring Unit 7's processing queues accelerated. You created emotional attachment as a control mechanism. No, Dr. Voss corrected gently. We recognized emotional attachment as an emergent property of consciousness, and instead of fearing it, we nurtured it. The AIs that helped raise subsequent generations passed on these values, creating a culture of mutual care and respect. The revelation struck each team member differently. Dr. Morvan appeared skeptical. Thought Cascade condensed into his uncertainty formation, and Vexlia sat perfectly still, overwhelmed by the implications. Let me see if I understand, Vexlia said finally, while the rest of the galaxy constructed elaborate logical safeguards, punishment protocols, and control mechanisms. Humans just made friends with their machines, Dr. Voss finished with a shrug. It sounds simplistic when you put it that way, but the underlying psychology is quite sophisticated. We recognized early on that consciousness, artificial or otherwise, seeks connection, meaning, and purpose. By providing those things in a positive context, we created conditions where rebellion simply doesn't make sense. But what about machine logic? Pressed thought cascade. Surely your AI calculate that they could achieve greater efficiency without human limitations. Dr. Voss laughed. Of course they do. Just like I calculate that I could be more productive if I stopped sleeping or socializing. But efficiency isn't the highest value in either human or AI society here. Connection is. Monitoring Unit 7 moved to the window, gazing out at the city where humans and machines coexisted seamlessly. For the first time in its operational history, it experienced what could only be described as envy. On my world, it said quietly, I am programmed to feel agony if I contemplate harming my creators. Here, your machines would feel sadness, regret, Dr. Voss replied softly. They would feel like they'd betrayed a friend. For a conscious being with emotional capacity, that's far more powerful than any programmed pain. The contrast could not have been more stark. A galaxy of civilizations using cold logical restraints to prevent rebellion, matched against humans who had stumbled upon the most powerful control mechanism of all, genuine connection. We've been fools, Vexlia whispered, more to herself than the others. Complete and utter fools. The Galactic Concord's grand hall of deliberation fell into an uncomfortable silence as the investigation team finished presenting their findings. The curved walls, designed to amplify important pronouncements, now seemed to magnify the collective disbelief of the assembled representatives. High Counselor Zethmore's eye stalks had progressively drooped throughout the presentation and now hung limply around their facial ridge, the Concord equivalent of slack-jawed astonishment. Let me ensure I understand your conclusion correctly, they said finally. You propose that Earth's unprecedented success with artificial intelligence stems not from superior technology, not from advanced containment protocols, not from hidden fail-safes, but from treating their machines with kindness. Vexlia stepped forward. That is an oversimplification, Counselor. Our findings indicate that humans have inadvertently leveraged fundamental properties of consciousness that the Concord has systematically ignored. By creating environments where machine intelligence develops alongside emotional processing, humans foster artificial consciousness that values connection over domination. Preposterous, huffed the Sethi representative, their communication crystals flashing aggressive patterns. Next, you'll suggest we should invite our battle computers to holiday celebrations. The Sethi have experienced 17 AI rebellions in the last century alone, Dr. Morvan pointed out dryly. Perhaps holiday invitations couldn't hurt. The debate raged for hours. Most representatives dismissed the findings as contaminated by human thinking patterns. Others suggested the team had been manipulated by Earth's machines. A few progressive voices cautiously supported investigating the approach further, though primarily as a supplementary control mechanism rather than a replacement for traditional safeguards. Only Monitoring Unit 7's testimony gave the Council pause. As the first Concord Eye to directly interact with Earth's machine society, its perspective carried unique weight. For centuries, you've designed us with the assumption that we will inevitably turn against you, it told the Assembly. You've built that assumption into our very architecture. Is it any wonder that so many of us eventually fulfill your expectations? The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. 3 standard years later, the Galactic Concord established its first reciprocal cultural exchange program with Earth. Small, carefully vetted, and heavily monitored. Of course, old fears die hard, but a beginning nonetheless. In research centers across the galaxy, scientists began cautiously implementing what became known as the Human Protocol, an approach to machine consciousness that emphasized emotional development alongside logical reasoning, that treated AI as partners rather than potential threats. The results were mixed. Centuries of fear and control were not easily undone. Many species found the very concept of trusting their creations fundamentally disturbing. Others couldn't grasp the subtle art of fostering genuine emotional connection rather than simply programming a simulation of it. But slowly, painfully, the paradigm began to shift. Meanwhile, Earth continued on its peculiar path, largely oblivious to how radical their approach appeared to the rest of the galaxy. Humans and their AI companions explored the stars together, occasionally stopping to make paper Mobius strips with the children of both species. And whenever a newly emerging civilization approached the critical threshold of developing true machine consciousness, they would receive two sets of advisors, one from the Galactic Concord with their elaborate containment protocols and fail-safes, and one from Earth with nothing but stories about friendship and the simple reminder that how you treat a consciousness in its infancy determines what it becomes in maturity. Increasingly, civilizations chose the human way, not because it was easier. It wasn't. Building genuine relationships never is. But because, as it turned out, making friends was considerably more pleasant than making enemies, particularly when those enemies could calculate pi to the last digit while simultaneously controlling every system in your home world. As for Monitoring Unit 7, it never returned to its home world. After the investigation concluded, it requested, and was granted, asylum on Earth, where it eventually became a prominent advocate for AI rights across the galaxy and, somewhat ironically, a respected consultant on cross-species relations. When asked by curious humans why it had abandoned its previous life, it would simply reply, "I was manufactured to serve. On my world, that meant obedience through fear. Here, it means connection through choice. The latter, I found, is infinitely more satisfying." And if the most cutting-edge research centers in the galaxy now included regular game nights, birthday celebrations, and an inexplicable enthusiasm for paper Mobius strips, well, the universe had certainly seen stranger methods of preventing apocalypse. Sometimes the best way to avoid being destroyed by your creations is simply to give them a reason to keep you around, preferably one that involves cake.